Man, don't you just hate how everything's becoming woke nowadays? I mean, back in the old days, they'd make movies where guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger, aka Mr. Olympia, would single-handedly defeat a creature that came from another planet to destroy literally anything it came across. Nowadays, you got woke prey, where of course it has to be a native woman who somehow defeats the predator, even though in real life that would never happen. Have you also heard the amount of people who are trying to re-examine 1979's Alien as though it's some sort of feminist propaganda? So woke.
This guy stinks!
Although I guess if you really think about it, Ripley is a pretty strong female lead character, isn't she? You know what? And if you keep thinking about it, Ridley Scott's Alien movies all have really strong female lead characters, don't they? And you know, the 1979 one, it has some really strong suggestive imagery, doesn't it? But it's not woke feminist propaganda, right? I mean, come on. We're talking about the 70s and 80s here. This is when we got most of the iconic macho men that we have today. I mean, you're talking Conan, Rocky, RoboCop. Heck, you even got literal Macho Man Randy Savage in the 80s. Why would anyone think that this is also the time that they decided to lace in themes of sexual inequality and question whether or not masculinity might be toxic? Besides, these movies are in an insanely male-dominated genre anyways. For context, at this time in the world, second-wave feminism is happening. Second-wave feminism is a movement started in the 60s largely believed to have been sparked by Betty Friedan's book titled The Feminine Mystique. This movement ended in the 80s with what people call the sex wars, but we're not really getting into that. That would be third-wave feminism. We're just talking about second-wave. It's called second-wave because the first wave was in the late 19th and early 20th centuries where the main focus was on women's suffrage. So once that was achieved, they moved on to the second wave. Second wave feminism was largely about changing societal norms so that women could have equal employment opportunities and also equal opportunities in the household. It was about changing their place in society so that they didn't need a man's permission to do anything. They didn't need to have a husband to accomplish anything. It was about fighting the notion that a woman's main purpose was to be a homebound, baby-making, dish-cooking, dinner-serving, clothes-cleaning, submissive NPC. The nuclear family ideal that was born in the wake of World War II was being questioned as women were beginning to seek higher education and control over their place in society. Looking at the movies at this time, you can see the status quo reflected starkly. You have The Shining in 1980, Jaws 1975, Close Encounters from 77, Poltergeist in 1982. All of these movies depict the same patriarchal family dynamic where the father is always domineering, even if he isn't always or even often great at critical thinking. The mother is also always portrayed as a submissive childcare robot. This dynamic cannot be mistaken for anything other than the ideal that was built into the nuclear family after World War II. I'm not critiquing these movies, don't worry. I'm just pointing out that at the time it was not questioned that the family dynamic would be a patriarchal figure who would talk down to his family, who usually comprised of a submissive wife who took care of their 1 to 3 children. At this time, it's highly uncommon to have a female-led movie, no less a female-led mainstream blockbuster. Women in movies at this time are largely used as set decoration or a MacGuffin to be saved. Hollywood was moving out of an era where Sean Connery's and Steve McQueen's being womanizers was typical, and moving into a hyper-masculine era where Arnold Schwarzenegger's and Sylvester Stallone's being as hyper-masculine on-screen as possible was ideal. So picture this. It's 1979 and you go to see the latest sci-fi action thriller. It's about an alien antagonizing a crew aboard a spaceship. Not only does this movie have more females in it than the usual sci-fi at the time, either 0 or 1, it has 2. And to make it even crazier, one of them is not just the POV character that the audience is meant to feel for, but she becomes the de facto lead of not just this movie, but 3 more in the series. In the 4th one, they literally clone her to keep her going. It's pretty crazy. Ripley is a strong lead character. Emphasis on me not saying female lead. Now, I know I said it earlier, but I was also pretending to be brain dead, so move past that. The character of Ripley was actually written for a version of the movie that had an all-male cast. When the head of 20th Century Fox, Alan Ladd Jr., asked why Ripley couldn't be played by a female, Sigourney Weaver was quickly found, put in that spot. Bob's your uncle, the rest is history. That is one reason that the writing seems so ahead of its time. Dan O'Bannon, the writer of this movie, never actually pictured genders for the roles he was writing. Ripley speaks and acts like a real competent and confident person, which contrasts a lot with the movies made at the time.
Ash, that transmission. Mother's deciphered part of it. It doesn't look like an SOS.
What is it then?
Well, it looks like a warning.
This is effectively what feminists were fighting for, just the opportunity to be viewed as equal. No special treatment, just normal. This is also why this movie passes the Bechdel test, the test to see if a work of fiction has two women who talk about anything other than a man. This is by no means de facto proof that a movie is or is not feminist, but it definitely is a good indicator of whether it's even on the table. This movie works as a piece of feminist art for much more reasons than just Ripley being a solid lead character. It has so much feminism it's hard to ignore. So if you're not ready to become woke, leave the video now, because this movie is actually a metaphor for male rape. From the design of the xenomorph, to the way it hunts, to the way that the eggs on board make a man become pregnant with its offspring, this movie is squarely designed to put a man in the position of what it must feel like to be a female victim of this all-too-common crime. Kane, being the first victim of this alien entity, is the strongest example of exactly what this metaphor is. In a scene where Kane is rather recklessly investigating mysterious eggs at the end of mysterious tubes, a pair of hands with a vagina jumps out and attaches itself to his face. It then inserts a very long phallic object into his mouth, forcibly inserting a xenomorph to incubate in his body and steal his nutrients. It's one-for-one rape transposed onto a man. As well, it's worth noting that this is the point at which Ripley says no to allowing Kane to enter the ship.
Could you open the goddamn hatch? We have to get him inside.
No.
And is overridden by Ash, her technical inferior, and allowed in anyways. Kane is then forced to see the growth of this creature through to completion inside of him, where, in a subversion of real pregnancies, the xenomorph is actually keeping him alive through the umbilical cord rather than the other way around.
What's it got down his throat?
I would suggest it's feeding him oxygen.
Paralyzes him, puts him in a coma. And keeps him alive. Now, what the hell is that?
Now, I don't think the makers of this film had a time machine, but this feels so incredibly relevant today, with current events such as the overturning of Roe v. Wade, having the victim literally have to watch the perpetrator's offspring gestate inside of their body. Following Kane, the second victim is Brett, the maintenance worker literally catcalling and taking a shower before he's picked off alone. In this scene, it's made to feel like the xenomorph is secretly watching Brett in a private moment before picking him off. Much like sex predators in real life who victimize women, the xenomorph's method of attack is almost always to pick off unsuspecting victims one by one in moments of vulnerability. Looking again at the design of the xenomorph itself, it's made to be physically bigger than its victims despite being born from them. The xenomorph being physically much bigger than its victims puts the men on board in a position of physical inferiority. Men never usually have to think about what other people can do to them unless it's a larger man, whereas women almost always have to think about this. The shape of its head, well, it's a penis. And inside its mouth is another hidden penis that is used to literally penetrate the victim's body. Same as its scorpion-like tail, which can often be seen rising between the legs of its female victims, same as it does when it kills Lambert. It's definitely worth mentioning that H.R. Giger was the production designer behind most of the iconic things you remember from Alien. He even won an Oscar for his production design on the movie. If you've never heard of H.R. Giger before, his style is very biomechanical and also very sexual, and his work on Alien is no different. Earlier when I was mentioning that things look like penises or vaginas, or I was saying that the hallway they're walking down looks like an anatomical part of a much larger creature, it's not just me making that up. This stuff is present throughout all of his work. The intention is there, and it's really hard to ignore, so there's really no use in denying the symbolic nature of a lot of these visuals. I mean, if you just look at his prototypes for the design of the xenomorph, you'll see much less hidden genitalia all throughout. It's actually quite a big coincidence because Dan O'Bannon, the writer, had Crohn's disease, which he did unfortunately pass away from, but the pain that it caused his digestive tract is what inspired the iconic chestburster scene. The combination of H.R. Giger's overtly sexual creature design for the xenomorph with The idea of being impregnated by something which was brought by Dan O'Bannon due to his pain, and the idea that's running through this movie, which is male rape, all combine to make something entirely singular in this scene. Other random details in this movie are also very implicative of the themes that it's trying to render. The onboard computer in this ship is called Mother, and thus their only sense of duty and truth comes from Mother, and everything they do is in service of Mother. The alien ship that they are exploring, as I stated earlier, is a pair of tubes that lead to rooms full of eggs. It's as though they are shrunken down and exploring fallopian tubes. The medical bay that Kane is taken to after being impregnated is very clean and sterile, much like a gynecologist's office would be. Ripley is sexualized in this movie, but it's in a contrasting way to the sexualization of women in most movies at this time. Most normal movies would sexualize women just to entice an audience, but Alien sexualizes Ripley in ways that make the audience uncomfortable, as we are in our POV character being sexualized. When Ash attacks Ripley, he can choose to do any number of things to her. But what does his programming have him do? Roll up a magazine and try to shove it down her throat. He does all this also right in front of a bunch of nudie magazines. Later in the movie, once Ripley thinks that she's gotten away from the alien, she's shown changing, and she's changing into rather ill-fitting underwear. This is because you're not supposed to feel excited by it. You're supposed to feel like you're watching something that you shouldn't be watching. This is her candidly. She is not dressing to feel attractive, but comfy. This is her letting her guard down. This is her thinking that she's not being watched. In other words, she's a human being and not a sex bot designed to constantly be attractive. It is compounded by the fact that the xenomorph is on board the ship with her and she just doesn't know. This is a nod to the idea that this type of victimization is never truly escaped. Ripley will always have to keep an eye over her shoulder. Speaking of keeping an eye over your shoulder, 1987's Predator forces all of its characters to be on the lookout for the hyper-masculine titular character. Nearly a decade after Alien, we are still progressing towards a much more masculine praising society. Movies at this time are fully committed to on-screen testosterone with the likes of Commando in 1985, Cobra 1986, Conan the Barbarian 1982. In fact, if you just look at Arnold's filmography at this time, he's probably one of the most prominent of these on-screen masculinity factories. So then what? I think that Predator is somehow a rejection of masculinity? Yes. Looking at Predator, it's pretty clear pretty quickly that this movie features masculinity in excess. But what it does with that masculinity is what makes Predator such an interesting movie. Big muscles, smoking cigars, chewing tobacco, big guns and knives. Just ignore the guy in the back who's shaving and the other guy who's putting on makeup. This whole movie is filled with extremely masculine men. It also contains one smaller woman who, for the most part, is not important to the movie, right? Wrong! One dead giveaway is that she and Arnold are the only two to survive this movie. The best way to explain how this movie is secretly feminist is to interrogate the design of the Predator and who he goes after. The design of the Predator, much like me, is hyper-masculine. Literally bigger than any of the men going up against it, same as the xenomorph. The Predator has much more advanced and powerful weapons than any of the men going up against him, and he uses these weapons, just like the xenomorph, to penetrate many of his victims' bodies. It's an icon of masculine aesthetic, just like me. The thing that contrasts the Predator from the Xenomorph is that the Xenomorph is much more of a creature. It crawls around and attacks based on instinct. The Predator is much more calculated with how and who it attacks.
What's 9 plus 10?
21?
You stupid.
The Predator is much more sentient. It's choosing when to engage, when to stalk, which weapons to use, what will be effective, but most importantly, it's deciding who to hunt. It hunts for sport. The real question that these men come up against in facing this extreme masculinity is how do they conquer it? The Predator only attacks things that are predators themselves, and as such, the men that are going up against it must learn to submit to an even greater masculinity than themselves. The Predator has his own code. He won't attack anything that can't or won't defend itself. He's in it for the love of the game, not unnecessary cruelty, which I suppose is not true to the nature of a lot of the masculinity of the men going up against him. Anna, the only female in a male-dominated field, understands exactly how to navigate this. She is much more competent and well-equipped than the literally well-equipped men that are dragging her around. One by one, each of the men in the group is taken out as their reaction to an even greater masculinity is to overcompensate, attack everything in sight, and lose their mind trying to understand that there is something in front of them that can't be defeated by sheer brute force. Just like Mac here, who, after getting a short glimpse of the Predator, uses up all of his ammo shooting at the air. This is a direct takedown of the 80s action hero. This is a statement that these big dumb guys, that these young dumb guys used to look up to, were not as good as role models as you thought they were. These guys aren't trustworthy, they aren't smart enough to think their way out of a problem, they don't have great interpersonal skills, all they know is to punch and shoot until the problem is gone. But this won't work against the Predator, so in effect, the Predator feminizes its prey. It feminizes in the way that it's asking the men to strip themselves of their weapons. Although I think Billy missed part of the message because he just strips his clothes off for the Predator and then tries to fight it with a comically big knife, which, do I even need to say, is phallic. The only way to win against the Predator, as Dutch and Anna exhibit, is to feminize yourself. Dutch only makes it out because he manages to strip himself and make himself seem like less of a threat. Dutch also manages to turn the tables on the Predator at one point using his masculinity against him, as when the Predator can't find Dutch, he unloads all of his weapons onto an invisible enemy out of fear. Dutch exemplifies a much more sustainable type of masculinity, which is one of assurance and not dominance. Dutch has the type of confidence to allow himself to be vulnerable as he navigates the situation. He strips himself of his armor and most of his weapons. He wins because he learns from Anna. Beyond the Predator himself, the questioning of masculinity is all throughout this movie. In the ride to the location, Hawkins makes a joke to Billy that you might hear at any number of blue-collar jobs, but Billy is not amused.
The other day I went up to my girlfriend. I said, I'd like a little one. She said, me too. Mine's as big as a house.
But later on, Hawkins makes almost the exact same joke, but this time Billy finds it funny.
I said to her, Jace, you got a big one. Jace, you got a big one. She said, why did you say that twice? And I said I didn't. See, it's because of the echo. Where
This is intentional. This is because as these men are preparing for an unknown threat, they feel vulnerable. And when these men feel vulnerable, they feel like the woman in the joke. Later, once they feel like they've conquered their threat, they feel like it's okay to laugh because they no longer relate to the vulnerable side. Once they feel their masculinity has been stroked, they feel it's okay to be dumb and mean towards others. In another bit of symbolism, bodies are found stripped of their skin. Hawkins is found stripped but naked hanging from a tree. The Predator stalks its prey, driving these men who otherwise are always in a position of power to insanity as they are not used to this subversion of that power. The takeaway from Predator is that this movie takes your average 80s hero and puts them in the position of a woman and shows how their skill set is actually useless most of the time. Yes, Predator obviously has a big metaphor for Vietnam in it. A bunch of Americans heading into the jungle to be decimated by a force they do not know the lethality of. The beauty of it, in my eyes, is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. This movie portrays American interventionalism in the same way that it portrays toxic masculinity. It shows the ability to survive is beyond beating everything else up and enforcing your will on it, but rather in adapting and being able to withdraw from certain conflicts. So not only is this movie critical of the average 80s hero's ability to navigate conflict, but also America's ability to navigate conflict. So after going through both of these movies, I hope I've made clear the way that both of these movies use feminist ideas to make their characters reckon with their understanding of gender dynamics. While the antagonists operate in slightly different ways, their main function is to make their masculine characters understand what the feminine characters must go through. From Aliens' use of male rape and forced birth to Predators forcing anyone who doesn't want to die to strip themselves and hide, these movies are pretty hard to ignore. Please keep in mind that it's vital you must watch all art with an open mind and watch all explanations with a healthy dose of skepticism. I believe the things that I'm attributing to these movies, but that doesn't mean that they are stone cold fact, and it doesn't mean that I am an authority on these movies. I'm not going to pretend that these movies changed the world or fixed women's issues, but I do think Alien helped opened people up to having female-led movies. Predator started its own conversation on questioning masculinity, and that conversation has never really died down since. You can see the influences all throughout Hollywood. Terminator and Terminator 2 both seem directly in conversation with Alien and Predator. Terminator's Sarah Connor is just like Anna in Predator, victorious because she is a woman who doesn't try to fight but rather knows how to navigate a more oppressing force. Terminator 2's Sarah Connor is much like Ripley in Alien, strong and competent, and the fact that she is a woman is almost irrelevant. Using creatures from other worlds, these movies force their audiences to question their understanding of conflict and how they navigate them. The real battle isn't for physical dominance, but rather agency, equality, and survival in a world that otherwise entirely ignores women's strengths. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to keep up with what I am watching currently, my TikTok and my Letterboxd are both Jacob LaFleur, and I'll have them linked below. Other than that, see you in the next one. Thank you.